Good evening. This is going to be somewhat freewheeling, I think. I've known Carl for some time. The last time Carl and I were doing any event together, he was actually exhibiting his financial sketches as artwork, and I was putting on a slightly mad stock exchange converted into an opera thing. But I was going to start, Carl. I know the procedure for tonight is...
We weren't supposed to start by confusing people.
No, we weren't supposed to start by confusing people.
Financial, art, sketch, opera.
Okay, so what we're going to do is to make this clear, we're not going to do the opera bit of it.
Okay.
But I'm going to ask you to do a sketch because essentially under the behavior gap name, you are renowned for taking complex financial concepts and turning them into really simple insights. I, of course, come from the academic world where we do exactly the opposite. So, I don't know, there's a number of sketches of yours that over the years I've found just distill aspects of financial advice into something absolutely clean and clear. And I was wondering if I could ask you to grab a Sharpie and get up and do one for us.
Sure.
But we need the story.
Yeah. It's really interesting that the images started, as I get asked this all the time, the images started really out of an act of desperation, really. Like I remember sitting across from clients, and I thought I was really good at explaining complex subjects simply, but I kept having this repeated experience. And those of you who are in the industry may have had this experience. You won't admit it here, but you may have had this experience where you're trying to describe something to a client, and you think you're really good at it, and you're using the simplest terms possible, and they're smart, intelligent, successful people, so it's not their fault, but you're just getting blank stares. Right? And I remember having this, I actually remember who it was, having the experience. I was sitting in a big brokerage firm that will go unnamed, but has a bull as its symbol, is owned by a bank, where I worked at the time, and I was trying to explain this concept, and they were like, no, they didn't get it, so I stood up at the board, and grabbed, which I'd never done before. I had and it should be relatively obvious, no art background at all. And I said, no, like this, and drew it. And I remember the mood sort of just, at first they said, oh, I get it, right? But I also remember the mood changing in the room, right? And I got kind of addicted to that experience, the experience of taking something complex, making it simple, and a light bulb going off. And one of the images that I've drawn a lot is just trying to explain how investor behavior sort of manifests itself at a macro level, right? And the story that I always use is 97, 98, 99 is still my favorite story. So if you remember, anybody remember those markets? 97, 98, 99? Good. Those of you who don't, you may have read about it in a history book, right? This is something that we called in hindsight the tech bubble, right? So 97, 98, 99, you had this market that just went straight up. The S&P 500 up 80%, the NASDAQ up over 100%. And we know how we behave. This was sort of this certainly wasn't the dawn of behavioral finance, but we were starting to pay attention a little bit, right? And we started measuring things with clients, I would say. We started measuring how much money goes in and out of different types of investments. Tell me if I'm taking way too long.
You're taking way too long.
Okay. So we started measuring how much money goes in and out of different types of investments. Here we can say net inflows, right? And the record for that before this time was $24 billion in 1 month, right? The record. Now, if you go to 97, 98, 99, if we go to January of 2000, right, which wasn't here, or here, and we didn't know what was going to happen, but we knew this had happened, right? $46 billion in January. February was $54 billion. And March, $39 billion, right? So just in time, well, anybody guess? No prizes for guessing, but what month we hit the market high for that cycle? It's March, right? So just sort of in time to collectively get our heads taken off, we were pouring money into the equity markets. If you remember that first quarter of 2000, it's crazy. NASDAQ was up 24% in the first quarter, right? So we were just pouring. Now again, we didn't know what was going to happen, but we did know what had happened. Right, so anyway, this is a really long story to demonstrate that here we'll clean it up a bit. We tend to get greedy and we buy, right? And then here we get fearful, and we sell. Now, we could go into story like October of 2002, right? Market low. First time in recorded history that we had 5 months in a row of net outflows. Right, so we're doing the exact, like, can you imagine buying anything else that way? Like at the Audi dealership, you show up, need an A6. Oh, such good news. We just marked them up 30%. You're like, oh, awesome, I'll take 3. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't happen anywhere else. It doesn't happen anywhere else. And then this was my only addition to the world was this repeat until broke. Repeat until broke. Right? Because we could go through, broke. If you don't know how to spell something while you're drawing and presenting, you just go like this, and it all works out. Right? So anybody become a real estate investor in the US in 2007? You know what I mean? So we go back to the tulip bulbs, right? So we just keep doing it over and over and over. So that image has been one of the more popular.
So from a behavioral perspective, it's interesting there because I like to think of, you get all these biases. If you go to Wikipedia today, you could look up psychological bias of decision making, and there are something like 200 of them there. Mm-hmm. And you think, well, that's great. Isn't it wonderful that we know so much more about how we as humans are fallible, stupid, irrational, whatever it may be? But it's completely impractical. What do you do with a list of 200 biases? And I think a useful lens for us to think through this is, along this journey, every single decision we make as humans, we make in the present, we make now. And every single decision we make as humans, there is a tension going on between the right decision or the sensible decision and the comfortable decision. And we all deviate to the comfortable decision all the time. Mm-hmm. And so these people who are buying at the top of the market with what you call greed, actually also probably was what made them feel comfortable right then. And at the bottom, what you call fear is just another way of saying that's what made me feel comfortable right then, we're selling. Yeah. So a big question here is, what is the cost that people pay for that emotional comfort? Yeah. And the whole term behavior gap is to say, if we took an investment and we just bought it and then we let it run, we did absolutely nothing to it, it would have a certain return over time. Right. But if you systematically were putting money in towards the top of the market and taking money out at the bottom, you're going to substantially underperform. And that gap between the performance of the investment and the performance of the investor, that's the behavior gap, right? And so there's all sorts of studies around the world that look at this, and some of them are probably way too high, but on average, I think it's fair to say the average person underperforms, the average investor underperforms a buy and hold investment by about 150 to 200 basis points per year. So the thing that's interesting to me about that is a buy and hold strategy, once you're in the markets, requires nothing more than complete ignorance to carry on with, right? So the fact that the average human underperforms complete ignorance by 150 to 200 basis points a year because of what makes them feel comfortable means that this sort of stuff actually incurs real costs on people. Yeah. Do you think that the behavior gap, though, would you say that's the biggest behavioral cost out there?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I just know that, so a couple of things about that. One, isn't it interesting, like hearing Buffett talk when he says the hallmark, like listen to this quote, it's nuts. The hallmark of our investment strategy is benign neglect bordering on sloth. Right? Like that's fascinating to me, that's like you celebrating being lazy. Right? Like it's the one place where you get rewarded for doing nothing. So I think that's a really, but the dilemma, of course, is we're wired the opposite because
do something.
We anticipate, right, like buying at the top feels comfortable. It also alleviates the pain of not being in, which I think is like when people finally capitulate, like, no, I'm being sensible, okay, fine, right? Which is what I did. I remember buying InfoSpace. Anybody remember InfoSpace? Like $10,000 was a lot of money back then to me, and it's a lot of money now. And I bought $10,000 worth of InfoSpace after being like discipline. If you're gonna capitulate early. You know what I mean? Like capitulating later just costs you more money. But I was like, no, okay, fine. And that InfoSpace, I don't know, like by 2002, it was worth more as a framed stock certificate.
That,
like,
by the way, is the story of my entire dieting history. Capitulate early.
Yeah. Well, yeah. For sure.
But that, of course, that benign neglect assumes you've got yourself up to the starting line. It assumes that you're invested in the markets, at which point your best bet is to leave it alone. I would argue that potentially for many, many investors out there, their biggest problem is the fear of going anywhere near the markets to start with at all. Because people sit on cash they do not need for long periods of time, for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And whilst doing that costs you money, so does the cost of reluctance, the cost of sitting on the sidelines watching everyone else invest.
Yeah, I think that this like constant series of trade-offs, right, that we're always making, both financial trade-offs but also emotional and behavioral trade-offs, is interesting. In late, well, 2007 for sure, right? But increasingly, I'm having conversations with people that would their experience has been so bad investing that they would gladly trade you just for their money back, right? And that's or how about this? People that come in and say, my home has been my greatest investment ever, and you dig through with them, you help them understand, like, well, I bet I know what that you've owned that home for 30 years. I bet I know what the return is, right? I bet it's inflation. You know, I bet it's 3%. How about we check? We check and it turns out to be something like 3%. You're like, how the equity markets during that time have done 8.5 or whatever the number is, right? How could your best invest? Well, it's the only investment you made over 30 years, right? And there's all sorts of reasons behind that. But I just think if you know yourself well enough to know that you can't behave, which a lot of us prove that we can't, we've got to build some guardrail in there. You either don't invest and buy CD ladders for the rest of your life, which is actually a totally fine strategy, right? Like, there's nothing, well, in America I would say there's nothing un-American about that, right? There's nothing stupid about that if you've made that decision with your eyes open, right? But if you've proven that you can't behave, you build some sort of guardrail around it, right?
Yeah, but you need to open your eyes, which means that you have to lift your eyes to the horizon. You have to think ahead. So I want to bring us onto something that I think is possibly relatively contentious in the world. So financial planning and the nature of planning itself. And there are increasingly these tools where we go, let me talk you through your every future whim, and we'll encode that as a goal, and we will do a cash flow model that solves the whole thing to 6 decimal places. Well, I know something of what your views on this, but I'd like you to elucidate your provocative view on the value of financial planning and how we should think about a plan.
That was a total setup.
Yeah.
So I'm a financial planner. I've got my certified financial planning designation. Like, I believe in this concept of planning, but I think financial plans are worthless without the ongoing process of planning, right? And
is that because no plan survives first contact with the enemy?
Yeah, no, look, the only thing we know for sure about your financial plan is that it's wrong. Like, that's the only thing we know for sure about it. We just don't know what direction and how. And so this idea, the industry, there was a whole phase, and I think a lot of the industry is still there, where we're selling for some reason we're so enlightened now, we don't sell product, but the plan became a product, and it became an event, right? And so I think when you say, that's why nobody wants to engage. Like, if you're on a plane and you want to have quiet, when your seatmate asks you what you do for a living, just say you're a financial planner, right? And it will be quiet, because what they think is 2-inch thick book that you're going to charge me $5,000 for, and then you're going to use it to sell me life insurance, right? So the dilemma with that is, like, financial planning is incredibly valuable, like the process of planning, but it's a process, right? It's a process by the way of guessing, right? And we should be committed to the process of guessing, not to the guess itself. And I think too often we become like defenders of outdated maps, right? Instead of guides in changing landscapes. And I think one element of that, I'm giving you all sorts of ammunition, I realize, as I'm talking, but one element of that is this feeling we have around certainty, right? And it's one of the most powerful selling tools in the world, to tell somebody you can give them certainty, because humans like nothing. I mean, they like nothing. They like nothing more than certainty. We hate nothing more than uncertainty. But the reality is life is uncertain. And so I think when we try to capture all this in these plans, I'm actually toying around with, kind of playing around with an idea. I'm not sure it's right yet, but the first thing you should do when you get any financial plan is flip to the projection section and tear them out, right? That we should somehow do planning without projections. I don't know how that looks, and maybe that's not exactly right. Maybe we should have the projection like we would a flight plan, right? And then realize, if you've ever asked a pilot, how often do you prepare a detailed flight plan? And well, every pilot I've ever asked, except the one that I would never fly with, says they prepare a flight plan every single time they fly. And then the next question would be, how often does the flight go according to plan? And the answer is always never. It never goes according to plan.
So it's about being prepared and being adaptable rather than preparing and following the plan.
Yeah,
Which is interesting, because in the corporate world, you look around and by and large, people deem a plan to be a good plan or a bad plan, depending on how much detail there is in it. So, the more lines on your Gantt chart, the more stakeholder checkpoints, the more KPIs, that's a good plan. And you could think about it actually as just the more detailed your plan, the sooner it and reality are going to diverge.
Yeah.
And that stresses people. When you have a very detailed plan,
Yeah.
and life isn't following that plan, people start to get stressed, they start to get worried, and that's when they start to make mistakes.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, I think financial plans and business plans are cultural artifacts, right? I think I've got a friend who runs a really successful tech startup, and he said their business plan is 3 words, like suck less tomorrow, right? Like just be a little less wrong. So I like the idea of, instead of trying to be right, trying to get all the projections right, what if we just relax and call them what they are?
Yeah.
Like it's a guess. Mr. and Mrs. Client, what are your goals? Oh, sorry, excuse me, I didn't mean goal. Let's guess, relax, let's guess.
Yeah.
Do you know they don't like that? Like they don't know. They know you're going to ask, like if you're in the industry and you're a planner, you know what you're going to get asked. If you go to meet with a financial planner, you're going to get asked what your goals are.
But no one really knows what their goals are.
Yeah, and clients tell me, like, that's one of the emails I get more than anything. Is like, I don't want to meet with a financial professional. They'll ask me what my goals are. Yeah. It's a really stressful thing. I don't know. And realize that they're guesses. So I like to just embrace that and say, relax. We're just going to guess, right?
Yeah.
And then we're going to adjust, and we'll take a step forward. And tomorrow we'll try to be a little less wrong, because we'll learn new information as we take a step forward. And so that process, I think there's some fear in the industry around that, engaging in that process, but I think it's awesome because it shifts the entire focus from defense of a map to guiding in a changing landscape, right? And it becomes about a relationship. I don't know what the future is going to look like, but I'm going to be here with my backpack with tools in it, and we'll pull them out and we'll apply them as we need to.
So if we had a plan that was very rough and ready, or at least very high level, that gave us a direction to point in. And we went, we may be 20 degrees to the right, we may be 20 degrees to the left, but I know it's out there somewhere. And so I'm vaguely going in the right direction, and I put my energies into tweaking and tacking against that direction more frequently, rather than trying to finesse the direction, as it were. Mm-hmm. So rather than get the end point precisely wrong, let me aim in roughly the right direction and try and stay aboard of that, stay adaptable.
Totally. Let me hear, I think what we often sell, and of course what people want, we're here, we want to go here. Now, the first thing we need to realize is that's a guess, right? Like, that's 30 years away. I mean, come on, I don't know where I'm going to be next month. How am I going to possibly, so that's a guess. So that's okay. What people want, and what we're more than willing to sell them in the industry, is this straight line, and that's what the financial plan represents the second it's printed, and only for that second, right? But the truth is, and we just need to be a little more, I think we just need to be a little more honest about this, that the truth is much more, if we can pull that off so that we're narrowing in the potential range of outcomes over time. And
so how do you know, there's a point here, whenever this deviates from your direction, you're going to get stressed because you think you're heading off that way or that way. How do you know when to revise your plan versus stick with it? When to revise so there's big elements of that, right? Like if you're talking about the investment piece, the underlying portfolio, chances are, here's how you change a plan. You change the plan based on people's events in life, not events in the market. Yeah.
Unless of course, here, right, if this happens and we're way under plan, I think of this as almost like an underfunded pension plan. You've got a couple levers you can pull here. You've got a couple levers you can pull to get yourself immediately back up here. We can lower goals. That would have been moving the line down. We can increase equity exposure, thereby increasing expected future returns. We could contribute more. We could die earlier. You know what I mean? Like, there's all sorts of levers here that we could spend a little bit less out here. So having a conversation around what levers would we like to pull, basically you're just having a trade-offs conversation. If we ever find ourselves in this experience, would you rather take less risk or not go on that vacation you planned? Right? Would you rather take more risk and go? So you have some discussions around what the levers are when you're thinking rationally, so that when you're in the moment thinking irrationally, you can pull out a document and go, hey, we had this conversation. What do you think about this? Right? Oh, no, that's why I actually just want to sell and get out. And you're like, no, actually, we're going to rebalance and buy more. Right? Yeah. And then when here, they're like, oh, this is awesome. I never want to sell ever again. You're like, no, I think we're going to take some risk off the table.
But that's the sort of thing, I mean, planning to do that isn't the same thing as planning what my future will be. It's creating a plan to govern my future behavior.
Right.
It says, if this happens, then I want to act in a way that I can decide ahead of time in a moment of calm, cool, and collected consideration, rather than try to make the decisions of what I should do when I'm in that excitable moment at the top or at the bottom.
Totally.
So that's a different sort of plan. That's me trying to govern my behavior rather than me trying to control the certainty of my future, which I cannot actually control.
Yeah, and even to the point of like what the goals, these guesses are, right? Just emphasizing to clients like, hey, I know that's going to change. And when it does, we'll make some adjustments to the plan. But that's very different than, oh no, the markets are down, let's change your investment exposure, right? That's a different experience. Unless the changes are predetermined and they're a way to repeatedly and unemotionally buy low and sell high, right? Like that's the idea behind rebalancing, just disciplined rebalancing. Right?
So, I mean, one of the tools that you can use to do that is something that I've used in the past with clients is to create an investor constitution. So you sit down with someone and you say, let us with you work out a set of rules that govern how you want to behave in the future. And at that point, and it will be completely personal, so for you it may be one set, for someone else it'll be another set, and the rules will be, here are the things I just don't invest in. I don't take currency positions because I don't believe I have any expertise in that, for example. I don't believe anyone has any expertise in that, but that's irrelevant. Secondly, I might put in things that are contingency plans for things that will happen in the future. I might say, I want to make sure that I don't buy or sell more than X times per month. So you start to put strictures on things. And at that point, you get your client to sign it, you laminate it, and you stick it on the fridge. So that in those moments in the future when you're tempted to do things, you have something you can go back to and go, here's what we agreed to do ahead of time. So you're effectively taking decisions away from your future self and giving them to your current self.
And done correctly, that's called an investment policy statement, right? Like done correctly, that's a really...
Well, I think this is a bit more, because an investment policy statement, this may have a whole lot of behavioral elements to it that go well beyond the investment side.
One really fun trick with that is to record video, which I've really enjoyed doing. Like when somebody's really scared and they absolutely don't want, like, you're here, and we just simply say, hey, I'm going to leave. Would you just talk into this camera and just explain how you feel right now? Because you know what? When we get here, you're not going to remember. Like I'm not going to let you sell here, right? I'm going to try really hard not to let you sell here. In fact, I'm going to hopefully we can rebalance and buy a little bit more. And someday when we're back on the ship, you know, right now we're in a lifeboat. It makes no sense to jump in the water. When we're back on the ship, I'm going to try and get you to sell a little bit. Like we're going to try and take a little, and you're going to tell me no way, because you're happy. So I want a video, like a note to self. Well, that's what we did before there was, you know, cameras on the iPhone. Was just write a note, and we would say open when Dow hits X, right? And we would just keep it in our file. I found that to be really effective.
If I could go to this down point here, because you say hopefully we rebalance and we buy a little bit more, and that's sensible, but there immediately comes a fine line there between, at that point, rebalancing and buying more, versus if I'm taking a very goals-based, future certainty-based thing. I'm now at a position where I can't make my future goal, and if I don't fancy letting go of my aspirations. I don't want to let go of my dreams, so I keep the goal where it is. There is a danger there, I think, in our industry of people going, tell me your goals. Now let's look at your risk tolerance. Let's look at the risk you're willing to take. Let's look at the risk that you are able to take, your risk capacity. And if I take the level of risk that tells me is appropriate, you're still not going to meet your goals. So what we're going to do is we're going to dial up risk to 11. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a big danger there, because in a lot of cash flow modeling software, if you do that, one statistic increases, which is the probability you will meet your goal increases. But so does the probability that you will catastrophically fail and be out in the street forever. Mm-hmm. But at that point, it's quite difficult emotionally for probably the advisor as well as the end client to decide what is rebalancing, because the world is jumping around a lot. What constitutes rebalancing and what constitutes me upping the risk too much in order to try and get back on my track?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting challenge, right? Like, because I think of those as kind of arrows in the quiver, right? Like rebalancing, if I'm 60% equity and I go to 65 and then the market falls again, because obviously we don't know that we're rebalancing here, right? Like that would be cool if we could just do, hey, how about we rebalance right here? But we're 65 and then we're at 70 and we're at 75 and the policy statement says we should go to 80. Like that gets a little scary. So yeah, I think you have some limit on that.
Yeah.
And you have talked about that limit before. And one thing I do want to just mention real quickly is I remember that experience in 2007 and 8 and 9. Right? I was fine in 97, 98, right? I was fine in Y2K. September 11th was bad for a whole bunch of reasons, but I managed to keep clients fine, right? We didn't misbehave other than myself buying InfoSpace, nobody misbehaved. We didn't misbehave in 2002. None of that was a problem. 2008 and 2009 was super scary, right? And anybody who was in the industry and tells me that it wasn't has simply forgotten, right? Like it was absolutely scary. And I remember we had clients, Dan and Barbara, we'll just call them Dan and Barbara. Dan and Barbara had, I helped them sell only because they had concentrated stock, a position in Quest. And he'd worked at Quest Quest Communications. It was at 42 when they came in and said, look, here's 95% of our net worth in this one stock. I just got fired or sort of let go early. What should I do with it? I said, well, if you're gonna work with me, we're gonna sell it all. Oh, because you think Quest is going down? I said, no, because you just don't hold that much. And Quest went from 42 to 3 over the next 6 months after we sold it. So Dan, he still calls me Santa Claus, right? So he'd never had a problem. We get to 2009, they're on a cruise. They left from Los Angeles, and apparently when you leave a cruise from Los Angeles, there's more older people than normal. I don't understand what that means. I thought it was always really old. But they left on the cruise, and they get to the first port, and this is right smack in the middle of the meltdown. AIG's going, this whole thing. And he said 50% of the people got off the boat and flew home, right? And he called me, he's like, are we okay? And I said, hey, just when you get back, come to the office and we'll have a chat. But there's nothing to do now. And this is the first time I remember in my career sitting and looking Dan and Barbara in the eyes and saying, there's absolutely nothing we could do different. You need to, and I remember closing the door, leaving that conference room saying, oh my gosh, I hope I'm right. You know what I mean? There was nothing else to say. There was no better thing to say. Based on the weighty evidence of history, there was but none of us knew. Yeah. And I love that. That's the whole thing about risk. We dial it, you know what I mean? We've come to think of and you and I, you always get a little feisty when I use this phrase, but I think risk is what's left over when you think you've thought of everything. Greg, last time I said that to me, I think he said, what does that even mean? What is that? But so I think this idea of risk management is, just so you understand, sorry I'm going off on this because I feel really strongly about it. Risk management is something we say in the industry. When you're talking to a client, they're thinking, in terms of our terminology, they're thinking uncertainty. Right? We're thinking risk, that's variability within known bounds. They're thinking I could end up under the bridge, unknown variability with no bounds. And so when we say risk management, they're like, oh, that's cool. You can just dial that thing up and down. That's all. I'll take a little more, please. Or I'll take a little less. No, but what about that when that happens? Right? So I think we have forgotten that in the end, we're dealing with irreducible uncertainty after all we can do.
This comes back to your certainty point, the fact that people just crave certainty.
Yeah.
And I'd say no one really ever buys an investment based on a risk-return trade-off. People don't buy numbers, they buy stories, they buy narratives. And one of those narratives is, with how much confidence has this person just told me they can read the future in their crystal ball?
Sure.
And I saw a study years ago that was asking the question of clients of advisors. They asked them a whole bunch of questions about their advisors, what they thought of them, what their education levels were. And the point was to figure out, what is it about advisors that make people have faith in them? Is it how educated you are? Is it how long you've been in the markets? Is it your accreditations? And it turned out the overwhelmingly dominant feature was how much the clients rated the confidence level of the advisor. And to me, that's an interesting kind of catch-22 there. Because when it comes to markets, the advisor you want is the one who's prepared to say to almost any question of where are things going, I don't know. And yet that's exactly what you don't want to hear from your advisor. So how do advisors get over that? You want to do what's right. You want to say, I don't know, but you don't want to lose your clients in the process.
Yeah, I get so mad about this. Because as an industry, we're more than willing to peddle certainty. And I did a big consulting arrangement recently in a country I won't mention. It was the biggest bank in this country, and they just paid a ton of money for the big tagline. It was all over everywhere. It was something around, it was delivering certainty. That was the tagline. And I just thought, really? I'd like to sign up. Could you give me some of that? Where do you get it? How much can I buy? So I get really frustrated around the idea that, because it puts anybody who wants to be honest in a really tough position. Because what you're doing is you're selling overconfidence. And overconfidence is such a slippery little problem, because overconfidence is what you get when experts behave exactly like experts behave. And you don't want an underconfident brain surgeon, right? But you probably also don't want an overconfident one. And so I think, what do we do about it? I think the answer is we tell the truth, and we start saying, look, I know this is what you want, right? This straight line. And I know, and that's what I would say, is say, look, and I know there are plenty of people willing to sell that to you, right? But how's that worked? I'd rather be more honest. And I have found this is a small sample size, but women clients tend to be more attuned to this kind of, I was going to use a term that I shouldn't use, this kind of malarkey, right? Around, oh, really? You know what life's going to look like 34 years from now? That's cool. So calling you on it. So I think it's a little easier to just say, I know there are more, I'm sure you can go to some other advisor and they'll tell you with 97.2745% confidence about your retirement. And what I'm telling you is, if you understand the math behind that statement, you'll understand they don't even know. They have no. Let me give you a couple questions to ask them, right? I would set that whole thing up and say, what we know is you're in the ballpark. As long as you behave correctly and we guide behavior, it looks like we can be successful. And I'm going to be here every step of the way to make sure that works, right? And I think that's a more valuable. It's certainly more honest.
So do you have any perspectives on how that plays out in the asset management industry? Because I think the parallel to that, coming out of advice and turning to the investment management, is, I would say, the industry pays far too much focus, far too much attention to the notion of optimization. So what our job is to find the optimal point for you. We will find the point of maximal risk-return efficiency that's right on the efficient frontier. And as a result, we can tell you that our model tells you that you should have 73.152% of emerging market equities and 5 point. And then a huge amount of effort goes into promoting why our asset allocation is better than everyone else's asset allocation, because it's sophisticated and we've used the best data and we've got the smartest people, etc. And yet, if you were to take all the asset allocations across the street with a similar risk level, in terms of their actual outcomes, they would be almost indistinguishable from each other. And so this notion of optimization pours a huge amount of energy into creating an illusion of not exactly certainty, but an illusion of something being optimal.
Right, like a false sense of precision.
Yeah. Whereas from a human perspective, would we not be better off saying to people, actually, here's one, and you might not want to put it quite this way, but here's one, for your purposes, it's good enough. But it's also one that's going to make you comfortable enough to stick with it through the journey. So this notion, in behavioral science, the term is satisficing rather than maximizing. You try to deliver to people something that that is good enough that they can live with. And doing that is a much more robust approach to giving someone something perfect that they can't live with.
Yeah. It just makes me think of a friend of mine that's a doctor that was telling me about this experience where he had a client that came in that wanted to argue just endlessly about some blood pressure medicine. And there's like 3 meetings through this and blood pressure, and I did this research, and he's finally like, wait, you still smoke, right? Like, there was this element of like, we're arguing about misdemeanor crimes, and you're committing a felony with your behavior continually. Like, what if we just get the felony right first, and then we'll go to, would that be okay? So I think that's why John Bogle's advice, like, you know, this may not be the best way to invest, but the number of ways that are worse than it are infinite. Yeah. Right? And I think that idea of just getting Churchill, democracy, the worst form of government ever created by the mind of man, except for all the others. Yeah. Right? Like, I think that idea of just helping people understand, like, I don't know. I have actually found it refreshing to say, I don't know. I have found it refreshing to say, look, I think this is good enough. And yeah, your asset allocation is going to matter a lot if we knew the information beforehand, but we don't. So what if we start here and we meter out? Like, I think early in a client relationship, I want to start far more conservative than I think I can, right? Because we know that first 6 months is really important.
Because you're building comfort.
Yeah, we're just making deposits of trust and behavioral trust, trying to get people to understand. So you're sort of metering out what you think. And back to your earlier question, like, this is my goals, this is my risk tolerance, right? Well, I think that I used to say to clients all the time, like, you may fire me for what I'm about to tell you, but you should definitely fire me if I don't, right? And so that idea of saying this, what you're telling me about your risk and this set of goals don't match. So this is just a trade-off. Like, what do we want to do here, right? So I think having really honest conversations is what I would pay an advisor for.
I'm just going to ask a couple more questions, and then we'll ask the audience for some questions. One of them is picking up on that, the need to say things that make people feel uncomfortable. And I remember a podcast with you, and I won't get this exactly right, but you said something about the frequency of times, the proportion of your clients who at some point in your client relationship you bring to tears in the course of this relationship by telling them what they might not want to hear or what they do want to hear or whatever. And do you think that it is necessary to get to that point to make people sufficiently uncomfortable that they face the truths that they might not otherwise want to face?
Yeah, I always had a goal that in the first meeting, someone was going to cry and it wasn't going to be me.
Okay.
But it was for different reasons.
Right.
It was really actually trying to understand the real values, like, why is this money really important, right? Yeah. So it was actually maybe positive tears rather than me beating them up. There was never any reason to make people feel uncomfortable other than, like, clarifying. I always thought my job was to take what people say is important to them, and again, keep your values off my plan. You know what I mean? So, like, let me understand your values. Help people understand what is important to them, and then align their use of capital with that, right? And we all know that there's a gap there almost always, right? If you don't think there's a gap, just the checkbook and the calendar never lie, right? You tell me what's important to you, and that's cool, but I'll prefer your revealed preferences by just looking at how you spend your time and your money. And so sometimes those were painful conversations, but it was just me reflecting. Like, you told me that it was the most important thing in the world was to coach your daughter's football team. And you don't do it because you don't have time. I understand. And now you're in here asking if I think it's a good decision to buy a new Tesla. Right? The current car's paid off. The Tesla's going to cost X per month. If we just translate that, look, I'm not telling you one right or wrong. I'm just reflecting what you told. to buy the Tesla is going to cost you how many hours a month? Do you want that, or do you want to coach your daughter's football team? And there's no no judgment in that conversation. This is what you told me. I remember when you told me about your values, you didn't say anything about a Tesla. It's just an example, right? And I wouldn't say it that way. Like, you'd be more careful, but we're just trying to help people understand that. And by the way, like, isn't that the kind of feedback you like? If done gently, like there's a really valuable like playing between a Zen Buddhist monk and a drill sergeant, right? Like, so somehow just trying to remind people subtly of what they told you was important to them, and saying, hey, just noticing a little gap here, and then helping people understand that gap is called being human, right? And that the moment you get that close, it's going to fall open again. Like, and we all do it. Like, that's a pretty valuable role if an advisor can help you align your use of capital with what you say is important to you over time. That's incredibly valuable. It has nothing to do with the asset allocation.
So last one for me. That puts advisors into a position where they're required to do things that perhaps they haven't trained for, because you're starting to talk about the advisor bleeding over into being a life coach of some sort and a counselor.
I don't think I use that term anywhere. Life coach. Don't accuse me of calling people life coaches.
Okay, fine.
Okay.
but you're talking about advisors doing things that aren't in the playbook, aren't in the standard advisor playbook. Let me give you the best book value. That seems to require a huge amount of humanity and empathy, etc. So I'm going to swing it completely the other way around, because one of the big topics right now, of course, is the robo world, robo advice, which I think is a very fraught term in many ways. But there is a question on the continuum from sort of no technology to lots of technology. How much technology do you want with your human?
Yep.
And one of the things that's of a lot of interest to us is this notion of decision prosthetics. The fact that we can give tools, often digital tools, to advisors and to clients to help embody some of this stuff into sets of rules, to automate practice, to guide decisions along the journey. Now, because you come from or are talking here about a very human side of it, to what degree do you think there is value to the prosthetics, to the tools in that relationship?
Yeah. Well, first I need to address the accusation levied against me. No, it's really interesting, right? Life planning and life coaching. It gets this really bad name sometimes in the industry. I remember having a conversation.
I wasn't saying it pejoratively, by the way.
Oh, no, and nor do I. But I do understand the concern, right? Like, and often when I, like, room full of advisors, you'll often see like this deer in the headlights look like, whoa, that doesn't fit in the calculator, you know? And all I'm suggesting is that that's exactly right. Like, that's to me, that's the value that's left when all this other stuff can be done by an algorithm. Now, we need to know, I still think, like, it doesn't eliminate the need for the technical chops, right? Like, we've got to be pros at that spreadsheet calculator job we all thought we signed up for. But now I think it's important, but it's no longer sufficient. Now I think we have to layer on top of it a level of emotional intelligence and empathy that we just didn't. It's not part of the job we signed up for. Like, the first time somebody cries in your office, I've watched this happen. I've watched advisors get up and be like, there's somebody, and normally they go out to their assistant and they're like, there's somebody crying in there. Like, what, you know what I mean? Like, they didn't know that was allowed to happen. But when you start talking, how could you not? Like, how could you not talk about goals and values? Like, we come from an industry that was just so busy throwing prescriptions at everybody. We just wanted to have the best prescription to throw. Oh, you don't like blue? Oh, I've got green, right? But we weren't diagnosing.
Yeah.
And so of who better, and I'm not talking about deep, but I don't know where the line is. It's really interesting, right? Like, yeah, you're right. I've been in one or two situations where I was like, whoa, I just uncovered something I'm clearly not prepared to handle, right? But that happened twice that I can think of out of hundreds of meetings. But all I'm saying is, how do you help somebody make investment decisions if you don't know those things?
Yeah.
Like, how could you, I mean, I could give you hundreds of examples, but how could you possibly tell me how to invest my money if you don't know that time with my family, mainly outside, and serving in my community are the reasons I invest the money, right? So then, to your question.
You've dealt with the non-accusation, now the question.
Yeah, the question. As much as possible.
Right.
Like, why wouldn't we use tech to the degree, and why would we be possibly scared of it? Like, I would think we would embrace every bit of technology that could help us make those decisions so that we can do the really awesome, amazing work of helping clients navigate that emotional landscape.
It frees humans to do what they do better.
Totally, and understand what's going on in that box, though.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't think it eliminates our need to be on top of it, or at least have a partner or somebody close by that is on top of that, right? There's room for people who are trained more in sort of the counseling settings. So that's as much as possible,
Good.
and not scared of it.
Okay, I would like to thank you all for coming this evening. I hope that was enlightening, and if not enlightening, at least somewhat entertaining. Carl, I'd like to thank you for your time this evening. It's wonderful as ever to chat.
Cheers. Thank you.